If you drive too close, you will meet white pickup trucks with no license plates. Men in camouflage will watch you through high-powered binoculars. You will see signs that do not just warn you away, but authorize the use of deadly force if you cross an invisible line in the sand. This is Groom Lake. This is Dreamland. The world knows it as Area 51. For over half a century, this remote detachment of Edwards Air Force Base has been the holy grail for conspiracy theorists, ufologists, and anyone suspicious of government narratives. But what actually happens there? The reality might be far more complex and perhaps even more disturbing than the little green men of popular culture. The story of Area 51 is a story of layers. When you peel back one layer of secrecy, you do not find the truth. You just find another, denser layer of classified information. It began not with aliens, but with fear. In the depths of the Cold War, the United States needed a place completely hidden from Soviet eyes. They needed a place to test aircraft that defied the known laws of aviation. In the 1950s, the CIA found Groom Lake. It was perfect, a flat, natural runway surrounded by mountains that blocked radar. Here, they built the U-2 spy plane. It flew higher than anyone thought possible, over 70,000 feet. When commercial pilots in that era saw silver objects shining in the sun way above their maximum altitude, they reported UFOs. They were not crazy, they were just seeing classified technology. The Air Force knew this, but they could not admit it, so they let the UFO rumors spread. It was a convenient cover story. It is a strange irony that the alien mythology of Area 51 was partly encouraged by the government itself to hide earthly secrets. Then came the A-12 Oxguard, the predecessor to the famous SR-71 Blackbird. It was a titanium needle that flew at 3 times the speed of sound. To curious onlookers in the 1960s, it did not look like an airplane. It looked like something from another world. The secrecy intensified. The base grew underground, according to many reports, with hangars built into the sides of mountains and elevators descending deep into the desert floor. But the modern legend of Area 51 truly exploded in 1989. A man named Bob Lazar came forward with a story that changed everything. He claimed he was a physicist hired to work at a site called S4, located just south of the main Area 51 facility near Papoose Lake. Lazar did not talk about spy planes. He talked about flying saucers. He claimed he saw 9 distinct alien craft being reverse-engineered by the US government. He described propulsion systems that used gravity amplifiers and an unstable super-heavy element he called Element 115. Lazar's story was filled with holes, and his credentials have been heavily questioned, but he gave the world a specific vocabulary for its suspicions. He talked about test flights of these glowing orbs on Wednesday nights, leading hordes of tourists to gather at the desert's edge, watching strange lights dance over the Groom Mountain Range. Whether Lazar was a whistleblower, a fraud, or a pawn used to spread disinformation, he successfully cemented Area 51 in the global consciousness as the ultimate warehouse of alien technology. The government's response was total silence. They would not even confirm the base had a name. It took until 2013, following a Freedom of Information Act request, for the CIA to finally officially acknowledge the existence of Area 51. They released documents detailing the U-2 program. They admitted it was there, but they said nothing about S4. They said nothing about crash retrievals. They said nothing about the things that people claim to have seen darting through the sky at impossible speeds, making 90-degree turns that would turn a human pilot into jelly. The admission of its existence did not end the mystery, it only deepened it. If they could lie for 60 years about the mere existence of a massive military installation, what else are they lying about today? The base has only expanded since then. Satellite imagery shows new massive hangars and longer runways appearing over the years. The Janets, the unmarked fleet of Boeing 737s that ferry workers from Las Vegas to the base every day, are busier than ever. Thousands of people work there, yet nothing leaks. The silence is maintained with a terrifying efficiency. We know they tested the stealth fighter there. We know about the advanced drones, but technology has moved far beyond that now. In an era of hypersonic missiles and potential anti-gravity research, Area 51 remains the most likely candidate for where the bleeding edge of science meets the darkest corners of national security. The question is no longer just, are there aliens at Area 51? The real question is, what terrifying human technologies are being developed right now, just beyond that ridge, that they are willing to kill to keep secret? If we accept that Area 51 was the birthplace of stealth technology and advanced spy planes, we must ask what its current purpose is. The Cold War is over, but the budget for black projects, classified military programs with practically zero public oversight, is higher than ever. The secretive nature of the base has not softened in the age of the internet. It has hardened. Today, conspiracy theories have evolved beyond just simple crash retrievals. A compelling modern theory focuses not on extraterrestrials, but on exotic human technology that breaks the known paradigm of physics. Consider the Tic-Tac UFO incidents encountered by Navy pilots off the coast of California in 2004. These objects demonstrated capabilities far beyond any known Russian or Chinese aircraft. They could drop from space to sea level in seconds and accelerate instantaneously without producing a sonic boom. Many analysts believe if this technology is human, it almost certainly came from the hangars of Area 51 or a similar sister facility like the Dugway Proving Ground. The theory is that the U.S. government has achieved breakthroughs in field propulsion, technology that manipulates gravity or electromagnetic fields to move a craft without conventional engines. If true, keeping this a secret is paramount. It would not just be a military advantage, it would upend the entire global energy economy. It is a secret worth more than trillions of dollars. There are darker whispers, too. Some insiders who have worked in related defense sectors have hinted at biological research. While less popular than the alien theories, the extreme isolation of Groom Lake makes it an ideal location for testing things that you absolutely cannot afford to have escaped. The base is surrounded by hundreds of miles of empty desert, a natural quarantine zone. We must also consider the psychological element of Area 51. It acts as a perfect distraction. By allowing the public to focus obsessively on this one well-known secret base, intelligence agencies can conduct perhaps even more sensitive operations at other, less famous locations. While everyone is watching the skies over Nevada, what is happening in remote facilities in Utah, Alaska, or deep in the Appalachian Mountains? Area 51 might just be the magician's waving hand, distracting you from the real trick happening elsewhere. Yet the strange events continue. Locals who live in the nearby town of Rachel, Nevada, still report strange phenomena, loud, earth-shaking rumbles with no visible aircraft, and lights that do not behave like airplanes. There is also the tragic case of former workers who sued the government in the 1990s. They claimed they were exposed to toxic fumes from the burning of classified stealth materials in open trenches at the base. The government invoked the state secrets privilege, effectively getting the case thrown out by a judge. They would rather let their own workers die without compensation than reveal what materials they were burning in those pits. This grim reality highlights the absolute priority of secrecy over human life at the site. In recent years, whistleblowers from high levels of government have started to make unprecedented claims about non-human intelligence. David Grush, a former intelligence official, testified under oath to Congress about crash retrieval programs. While he did not specifically name Area 51 as the current hub, all roads in this mystery eventually lead back to Groom Lake. It is the historical epicenter. If recovered craft exist, they almost certainly spent time being analyzed in those specialized desert hangars. The ultimate secret of Area 51 might be that it is a mirror. We look at it and see our own greatest fears and hopes. Some see terrifying government overreach, a shadow state that answers to no one. Others see hope that we are not alone in the universe, that we have brothers in the stars, even if our leaders are hiding them from us. What is undeniable is that something profound is still happening there. The security perimeter is not just for show. The billions of dollars funneled into that hole in the desert are producing something. Whether it is a hypersonic weapon capable of striking anywhere on Earth in an hour, or a stable element that can warp space-time, the work continues. Until the day the doors are thrown open, an unlikely event, we are left with the whispers in the desert wind. We are left with the knowledge that just a few hours' drive from Las Vegas, humanity might be sitting on the biggest realization in its history, guarded by men with guns who are authorized to shoot first and ask questions later. Area 51 remains a modern fortress of solitude, holding secrets that, if revealed, might rewrite the history of our species.
They call it the American dream, a promise that anyone, no matter where they were born, no matter their class or background, could rise through hard work, courage, and determination. But what if I told you the American dream was never meant to be about money? The phrase American dream was first written in 1931 by a historian named James Truslow Adams in his book The Epic of America. He didn't talk about mansions, luxury cars, or fame. He spoke of a dream of a better, richer, and happier life for all citizens. A dream not of wealth, but of opportunity, equality, and dignity. The year was 1776. The Founding Fathers stood before the world with a radical idea that all men are created equal. It was revolutionary and also a lie. While Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, enslaved people worked his lands. The new land of freedom was built on contradictions: liberty for some, oppression for others. Yet the idea of the dream was powerful. It whispered to millions beyond the Atlantic. Come here, work hard, build something new. By the 1800s, immigrants poured into Ellis Island. Farmers from Italy, laborers from Ireland, dreamers from China. They believed America was a place where you could reinvent yourself, and sometimes it was. They built the railroads, the cities, and the industries that powered the 19th century. But while the rich grew richer, others barely survived. By the 1920s, America was booming. Jazz filled the streets, cars filled the roads, and the stock market soared. People believed success was limitless, that anyone could be the next Rockefeller or Ford. But in 1929, it all collapsed. The Great Depression shattered that illusion. Millions lost their homes, their jobs, their hope. And it was then, in that darkness, that James Truslow Adams gave new meaning to the American dream. He said the dream wasn't about getting rich, it was about getting a fair chance. A life where people could achieve according to their ability and effort, not the class they were born into. His words became the moral heartbeat of a broken nation. They inspired leaders, reformers, and ordinary citizens to rebuild America fairer this time. In the 1940s and 50s, after World War II, the dream seemed reborn. Soldiers returned home to the GI Bill, which offered education and housing. Suburbs grew, families flourished, and the middle class became the symbol of success. White picket fences, 2 kids, a car, a steady job. For millions, that was the American dream. But there was a hidden truth. That dream wasn't available to everyone. African Americans were systematically denied loans, college access, and jobs. Native Americans were displaced, immigrants were exploited. Women were told their dream was to stay home. Still, the idea of the dream persisted, evolving, twisting, surviving. By the 1960s, people began to demand the real dream. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke not only of civil rights, but of an economic dream. I have a dream, he said, that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. It wasn't about luxury, it was about justice, about a dream big enough for everyone. Yet as the decades passed, something changed. The dream was sold literally. Corporations turned it into a marketing slogan. Buy this car, get this house, live the dream. And slowly, the dream of community became a dream of consumption. By the end of the 20th century, the American dream had become a paradox. A nation richer than ever, but also more divided than ever. The dream that began as hope had become a hustle. The American dream has always been more than a story, it's a mirror. It reflects who we are, what we value, and what we believe is possible. But in the 21st century, that mirror is cracked. Homeownership out of reach. College buried in debt. Healthcare a luxury. For millions of Americans, the dream feels like a broken promise. The gap between rich and poor is wider than ever. And the younger generations are asking, was the dream ever real? Sociologists, say the modern American dream has been distorted. It's no longer about opportunity, it's about survival. A system that once lifted people up now keeps many down. The rise of Wall Street in the 1980s brought wealth to some, but crushed others. Unions weakened, wages stagnated, and jobs went overseas. The message shifted from "work hard and you'll succeed" to "if you're not rich, it's your fault." TV shows and ads glorified success. Mansions, fame, influence. Meanwhile, millions worked 2 jobs just to pay rent. It wasn't laziness, it was the system. The dream had been hijacked by the illusion of constant growth. Then came 2008. The housing market crashed. Banks fell. Millions lost their homes, the very symbol of the American dream. For many, it was a wake-up call. The dream was fragile, built on credit and promises. And yet, in the midst of crisis, people began to dream differently. They started questioning what success really means. Today, a new version of the American dream is being written. It's no longer about a white fence, it's about freedom. Freedom to work remotely. Freedom to live anywhere. Freedom to find purpose, not just profit. You see, the dream is evolving. From competition to connection. From wealth to well-being. Immigrants, activists, and creators across the nation are redefining what it means to make it. They're proving that the American dream doesn't belong to one group. It belongs to everyone who believes in a better tomorrow. Maybe the real American dream was never about a house or a job. Maybe it was about hope. The stubborn belief that tomorrow can be better than today. That's why, even now, people still come to America with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. Because deep down, we all want the same thing. A chance to be seen. A chance to belong. A chance to dream again. So maybe the untold story of the American dream is that it was never lost. It just needed to be remembered and rewritten. By you, by me, by all of us. The American dream isn't a place. It's a promise. And its next chapter starts now.
The moon landing conspiracy. What they don't want you to ask. The year is 1969. The world holds its breath. Millions gather around televisions, watching grainy black and white footage. A human being, Neil Armstrong, steps onto the lunar surface. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Or was it? For over 5 decades, that iconic moment has been etched into history as humanity's greatest achievement. But what if it was all a meticulously crafted deception? What if the greatest show on Earth never left Earth? For a vocal, persistent segment of the population, the moon landing was a hoax, a spectacular piece of Cold War propaganda staged in a Hollywood studio. They argue that the technological challenges were too immense, the geopolitical stakes too high, and the evidence riddled with inconsistencies. And once you start looking, once you start asking the questions they don't want you to ask, it becomes incredibly difficult to unsee some of the unsettling detail. Let's start with the flag. That famous image of Buzz Aldrin saluting the American flag on the airless moon. Why is it waving? There's no wind on the moon, a vacuum. Proponents of the hoax theory point to this as immediate proof of a terrestrial breeze. NASA's official explanation is that the flag was mounted on a telescopic pole with a horizontal bar to make it fly proudly, and the ripples are from it being folded and unfolded. But look closely. Does it look merely wrinkled or truly as if caught in a gentle gust? It's the first ripple in a sea of doubt. Then there's the distinct lack of stars in any of the Apollo photographs. When Armstrong and Aldrin gazed up from the lunar surface, they should have seen a dazzling, unfiltered canvas of stars, far brighter and more numerous than from Earth. Yet, every single photograph shows a perfectly black sky. NASA claims the lunar surface and the astronauts' white suits were so brightly lit by the sun that the camera's exposure settings had to be adjusted, making the faint light from distant stars invisible. But for a mission that defined humanity's reach into the cosmos, isn't it a little odd to miss out on capturing the very essence of space itself? The shadows cast on the lunar surface also raise eyebrows. In many photographs, parallel objects appear to cast shadows that are not parallel, almost as if there are multiple light sources. With the sun as the only light source on the moon, all shadows should be perfectly parallel. This seemingly minor detail leads skeptics to suggest multiple artificial light sources, just like on a film set. NASA's counter. The perspective of the camera and the irregular lunar terrain can create optical illusion. But for a scientific mission, are we expected to simply accept optical illusions as explanations for fundamental photographic inconsistencies? What about the radiation? The Earth is protected by the Van Allen belts, two layers of charged particles held in place by Earth's magnetic field. To reach the moon, astronauts had to pass through these belts. Scientists have warned that the radiation levels inside these belts are lethal, far too high for human exposure, even for a brief pass-through. How did the Apollo astronauts survive this deadly gauntlet in their thin spacecraft? NASA insists the spacecraft traveled through the thinnest parts of the belts at high speed, minimizing exposure, and that the shielding was sufficient. But even with their explanation, the sheer audacity of passing through what many still consider a radiation death trap remains a chilling point for skeptics. And where are the landing craters? When the lunar module descended, its powerful engines should have kicked up a massive cloud of dust and left a significant crater directly beneath it. Yet in the photographs, the landing site appears pristine, with only footprints. There's no visible crater, no massive displacement of regolith from a rocket engine firing directly onto the surface. NASA explains that the lunar regolith is very compact, and the engine blast was spread out, not focused, creating more of a scouring effect than a crater. But for something that weighed thousands of pounds descending with powerful thrust, the almost undisturbed surface seems eerily convenient. These are just a few of the glaring questions. The sheer scale of the operation, the perfect execution under immense pressure, the constant pressure of the space race with the Soviet Union, all fuel the suspicion. Was it truly a triumph of human ingenuity or the ultimate illusion designed to win the hearts and minds of the world? The official story is clear, but the shadows on the moon and in the evidence continue to lengthen. The questions surrounding the moon landing do not stop with flags and shadows. Dig deeper, and you encounter an array of technical anomalies and convenient disappearances that only intensify the doubts. Take the photographic evidence itself. Beyond the lack of stars and strange shadows, many critics point to crosshairs that appear behind objects in some photos. These crosshairs, etched onto the camera lenses for calibration, should always be in front of everything captured. When they appear behind an object, it suggests manipulation, perhaps even cut-and-paste editing, implying a staged scene where foreground objects were added later. NASA explains this as an optical anomaly caused by overexposure, where bright white objects can burn out the thin lines of the crosshairs. But for photographic evidence of such a monumental event, such convenient anomalies are difficult to simply dismiss. What about the extraordinary heat? The lunar surface during the day can reach temperatures of over 250 degrees Fahrenheit and drop to minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit at night. The cameras, film, and delicate equipment used by the astronauts should have melted or frozen. How did they function perfectly in such extreme conditions? NASA counters that the equipment was specially designed, shielded, and insulated, and that the missions were timed to avoid the most extreme temperatures. Yet, even with specialized gear, the flawless operation of sensitive electronics and film in such a hostile environment stretches credulity for many. And the rocks. The moon rocks brought back by Apollo missions are presented as irrefutable proof. But how do we know they're from the moon? Skeptics highlight that moon rocks look suspiciously similar to meteorites found on Earth that are believed to originate from the moon. Could these moon rocks have been conveniently sourced from terrestrial meteorites or even fabricated? The scientific community dismisses this, pointing to unique isotopic compositions in the Apollo samples that are impossible to replicate or find naturally on Earth in such quantities. But without a direct, verifiable trip to the moon, the ultimate origin of these rocks remains, for some, a matter of faith in authority. Then there is the issue of the missing data. Over 700 boxes of original moon landing tapes containing telemetry data and high-quality recordings mysteriously went missing from NASA archives. They were either erased, recorded over, or simply cannot be found. NASA's official statement in 2009 acknowledged the loss, citing budgetary constraints and the common practice of reusing tapes during that era. But for an event of such historical magnitude, the disappearance of crucial original data feels less like an oversight and more like a deliberate act of concealment. Why destroy or lose the definitive proof of humanity's greatest journey? And the deaths. A number of key personnel involved in the Apollo program died under mysterious or unusual circumstances before or during the missions. From astronauts to engineers, a surprising number of individuals connected to the program met untimely ends. While each case has an official explanation, the sheer cluster of tragedies fuels the idea of a deliberate silencing, an attempt to prevent potential whistleblowers from revealing the truth. Is it merely tragic coincidence, or a grim reflection of the stakes involved in maintaining such a colossal secret? Finally, consider the motivation. The Cold War was not just a military conflict, it was a battle for hearts and minds, a propaganda war on a global scale. The Soviets had launched Sputnik, putting the first satellite and then the first human in space. America desperately needed a definitive victory, a monumental achievement to prove its technological and ideological superiority. A staged moon landing would have been the ultimate psychological weapon, a powerful message to the world that America could achieve the impossible, even if it meant faking it. The very notion that a secret of this magnitude could be kept by thousands of people for decades is often cited as the ultimate refutation of the hoax theory. But history is littered with examples of vast government deceptions, from Project Mockingbird to Operation Northwoods. The compartmentalization of information, the fear of reprisal, and the unwavering loyalty to national security can compel many to keep silent. The evidence for a moon landing is substantial, from laser reflectors left on the moon by Apollo missions that we can still bounce lasers off today, to photographs from modern lunar orbiters showing the actual landing sites. But for those who question, these pieces of evidence often lead to more questions, pushing them further into the rabbit hole. The debate persists because the consequences of a hoax would be astronomical. It would shatter trust in institutions, redefine our understanding of history, and expose a level of government deception almost beyond comprehension. The official narrative demands our belief, but what if, in our eagerness to believe in humanity's triumph, we stopped asking the vital questions? What if they don't want us to ask?
Classical The Secret History Behind the U.S. Dollar. They say money makes the world go round. But the story of money, especially the story of the U.S. dollar, is not just about coins, paper, or even numbers on a screen. It is a story about trust, ambition, and control. It is the tale of how a simple symbol, a green piece of paper, came to dominate the global stage, shaping empires, wars, and destinies. To understand the dollar, we must go back to the very beginning, to a time before there even was a United States, before the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution, before anyone imagined a world where one nation's currency would rule them all. In the 1700s, the American colonies were scattered, fragile, and dependent. Trade was messy and uncertain. British pounds circulated alongside Spanish pesos and Dutch guilders. Merchants used whatever coins they could find, often clipping bits of metal to make small change. Paper money existed, but it was unstable, sometimes printed by local governments, sometimes issued by private banks, and often worthless by the time it reached your hand. But there was one coin that stood out, the Spanish silver dollar, also called the piece of 8. It was reliable, familiar, and widely accepted across the Atlantic world. Colonists trusted it because it was made of real silver. You could weigh it, melt it, and know exactly what it was worth. It became the first true common currency in the Americas. So when the United States finally won independence, it needed a symbol not just of freedom but of economic sovereignty. Something that said, we are a nation, we can stand on our own. In 1792, Congress passed the Coinage Act, establishing the dollar as the country's official currency. It defined the dollar's value in terms of silver and gold and created the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia. For the first time, American coins bore the words United States of America. The newborn nation finally had its own money, and with it, a promise. But that promise would soon be tested. Because money, any money, is only as strong as the trust behind it, and the young republic was drowning in debt. The Revolutionary War had left the government broke. The Continental Congress had printed millions of paper notes, known as Continentals, to fund the fight against Britain. At first, they seemed like magic, a paper that could be exchanged for goods, horses, or weapons. But the government printed too many. Prices soared, inflation exploded, and soon the phrase, "not worth a continental," became part of American vocabulary. By the time George Washington took office, the nation's finances were in chaos. Then came Alexander Hamilton, the brilliant, controversial first Secretary of the Treasury. He understood something most didn't. Money is power, and control over money means control over destiny. Hamilton proposed the creation of a national bank to issue stable notes, manage government debt, and tie the nation's credit to its wealthiest citizens. It was a radical idea, and not everyone liked it. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison saw it as a betrayal of democracy, a dangerous step toward monarchy and corruption. They feared a government controlled by bankers. But Hamilton's vision prevailed. The first Bank of the United States was born in 1791, giving the new nation its first central financial authority. From that moment, the dollar was no longer just silver or gold. It became an idea, a belief in America's power to back its promises. Still, the conflicts Hamilton sparked would echo through the centuries. Who controls money, the people, the government, or the financiers behind the curtain? The early 1800s brought booms and panics, prosperity and collapse. Banks printed their own notes. Farmers traded goods for paper that might or might not hold value. The dollar fluctuated, sometimes strong, sometimes unstable. Yet, through war and expansion, it endured. By the time of the Civil War, the United States once again faced a crisis that would redefine its currency. The Union needed money fast. Gold was scarce, the war was costly, and so the government made a desperate move. It began printing paper money not backed by gold or silver. They called them greenbacks, named for the color of their ink. For the first time, Americans used a fiat currency, money backed not by metal but by the promise of the U.S. government. Some called it genius, others called it treason, but it worked. Greenbacks helped fund the war and saved the Union from financial collapse. Yet when the fighting ended, the question remained: should America return to gold or embrace paper forever? The debate split the country. Farmers and laborers liked greenbacks. They made debt easier to pay. Bankers and elites demanded a return to gold. They wanted money that couldn't be inflated away. In 1879, the U.S. returned to the gold standard, promising to exchange dollars for gold at a fixed rate. Stability returned for a while. But beneath the surface, new powers were emerging. Railroads, oil barons, and financiers built vast empires. The economy grew, but so did inequality. Every panic, 1873, 1893, 1907, reminded Americans that the dollar's strength depended on fragile confidence. By the early 20th century, a handful of bankers controlled most of the nation's credit. When the panic of 1907 nearly collapsed the financial system, it became clear that something had to change. In 1913, Congress created the Federal Reserve System, a central bank to stabilize the dollar, manage interest rates, and act as a lender of last resort. But the Federal Reserve also brought secrecy, meetings behind closed doors, decisions that could move markets, power concentrated in a few hands, unelected, unseen. It was the beginning of a new era, the age of managed money. From silver coins and paper promises, the dollar had evolved into something far more mysterious, a hybrid of belief, power, and invisible control. And soon, the world would come to depend on it. The year was 1914. The world stood on the edge of war, and with it, the global economy trembled. Europe's old empires, Britain, France, Germany, all clung to the gold standard, believing their wealth was as solid as the metal in their vaults. But gold cannot move fast enough for war. When the First World War erupted, governments needed to pay armies, buy weapons, feed millions. Gold was too slow, too heavy, too finite. So they printed. Every nation suspended gold convertibility and flooded the world with paper promises. And in that chaos, something remarkable happened. The United States became the world's creditor. While Europe bled, America produced steel, oil, wheat, and weapons. Gold flowed across the Atlantic, piling up in New York vaults. For the first time, the balance of global finance tilted west. By 1917, when the U.S. entered the war, the dollar had quietly begun its ascent. American banks lent to Europe. American goods fed the Allies. When the guns fell silent in 1918, the U.S. emerged not just victorious, but wealthy beyond precedent. Yet wealth brings responsibility and temptation. After the war, Washington struggled to decide what kind of power the dollar should become. Should it remain anchored to gold, pure and rigid? Or should it become flexible, adaptable, even political? The 1920s answered that question in their own reckless way. Speculation, easy credit, roaring markets, the world fell in love with money again. And at the center of that euphoria was the dollar. Wall Street banks extended loans to Germany, Britain, and Latin America. Dollars financed reconstruction, trade, and dreams. The Federal Reserve kept rates low. Gold poured in. The United States looked unstoppable. But by 1929, the illusion cracked. When stock prices collapsed that October, panic rippled across oceans. Foreign borrowers couldn't repay their dollar debts. Banks failed. The global system imploded. People ran to the one thing they still trusted: gold. In 1933, with the Great Depression destroying livelihoods, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took a step no one thought possible. He suspended the domestic gold standard. Americans could no longer exchange their dollars for gold. The government even confiscated private holdings, ordering citizens to turn in their coins and bullion. It was shocking, but it worked. By controlling gold directly, the U.S. government could expand the money supply, spend on recovery, and rebuild confidence. The dollar was re-anchored to gold, but at a new price, $35 an ounce, a quiet devaluation that made American exports cheaper and global gold worth more. From the ruins of depression, a new kind of dollar emerged, not just a claim on metal, but a symbol of faith in the U.S. state itself. Then came the second cataclysm. In 1939, war returned to Europe. Again the world demanded production, steel, ships, and planes. Again the U.S. supplied it all. When Pearl Harbor dragged America fully into the conflict, the machinery of industry exploded into motion. By the time the Allies triumphed in 1945, the United States held two-thirds of the world's gold and produced half its industrial output. Every other major power lay in ashes. The pound was broken, the franc exhausted, the mark erased. In those closing months of the war, as the fighting still raged, economists and diplomats gathered in a quiet mountain resort in New Hampshire. The place was called Bretton Woods. There, 44 nations negotiated the shape of the post-war world. Out of that meeting came the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and something far greater, a new monetary order built on the U.S. dollar. Under the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, every currency would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar alone would be convertible to gold at $35 per ounce. It was a breathtaking system. Instead of every nation hoarding metal, they would hold dollars. The United States, in turn, promised discipline to keep its currency as good as gold. But behind that promise was a quiet understanding. If the world wanted dollars, America would print them. Trade, reconstruction, and aid all required the greenback, and every dollar circulating abroad strengthened U.S. influence. Bretton Woods wasn't merely economic policy, it was financial empire by design. Europe and Japan rebuilt using American loans. Oil, shipping, and commodities were priced in dollars. Even neutral countries settled their trade through the Federal Reserve. Slowly, invisibly, the U.S. currency became the bloodstream of global commerce. To ordinary Americans, it looked like triumph. To strategists, it looked like control. Because whoever issues the world's money wields extraordinary power. You can fund wars without foreign permission. You can sanction enemies without firing a shot. You can shift wealth across oceans by adjusting interest rates. This was the new weapon of the modern age, monetary hegemony. And it rested on a single, silent assumption, that everyone would always believe in the dollar. But even in those golden years, a few voices whispered warnings. Economists like Triffin and Roof saw the contradiction. If the world demanded more dollars, the U.S. had to create them, which meant running deficits. Yet the more dollars it printed, the weaker each one's link to gold became. It was a paradox at the heart of the system, confidence feeding on itself. For now, though, the illusion held. American soldiers returned home. The GI Bill fueled prosperity. Suburbia bloomed, cars filled highways, refrigerators hummed, and every product in the world seemed stamped, made in USA. The dollar wasn't just money anymore. It was identity. Green ink engraved portraits, secret symbols, every note whispered authority. The great seal on the back of the bill, the pyramid with the all-seeing eye, the Latin phrase annuit coeptes, he has favored our undertakings. Coincidence or coded reminder of divine providence? No one could say for sure, but to millions around the globe, the dollar carried an aura of mystique, a kind of sacred power that transcended its paper form. Still, beneath that power, hidden cracks were forming. As the 1940s closed, the Cold War began. The U.S. now faced an ideological rival, the Soviet Union, and to contain it, America would need to spend, invest, and project strength far beyond its borders. Each new commitment required dollars. Dollars for soldiers in Europe, for aid in Asia, for trade in Latin America. The world accepted them eagerly. Yet with every shipment, the promise of gold convertibility grew thinner. Few noticed it then. The war was over, the future seemed secure, and the United States stood tall. But the seeds of a new secret chapter had already been planted, a chapter that would shatter the illusion of eternal convertibility, expose the fragility of global trust, and redefine what money meant forever. The dollar had risen to the throne of world finance. Now it would have to learn what it meant to rule. By the 1950s, the dollar had conquered the world. It was everywhere, in the vaults of foreign banks, in the hands of traders in Hong Kong, in the contracts that moved oil, wheat, and gold. The American dream had become the world's language of money. But beneath that glittering surface, something dark and inevitable was forming. Every foreign government that held dollars had a promise that they could exchange those green bills for U.S. gold anytime at $35 per ounce. It was the sacred foundation of the Bretton Woods system. And yet, behind the doors of Fort Knox, the gold was quietly draining away. In the 1960s, the United States faced new kinds of wars in Vietnam against poverty and against its own social unrest. The cost of empire was rising. Presidents promised guns and butter, but both required spending, and spending required dollars. To maintain global leadership, America printed more money, far more than its gold reserves could justify. Foreign governments began to notice. They saw the arithmetic didn't add up. In 1965, French President Charles de Gaulle issued a quiet challenge. He ordered his central bank to exchange its dollar reserves for gold, shipping tons of bullion from New York back to Paris. Other nations followed. Gold left the U.S. by the plane load. Behind the polished speeches and smiling photographs, A crisis of confidence was unfolding. The dollar, the very symbol of stability, was being questioned by its own allies. By the summer of 1971, the math was undeniable. There were far more dollars in circulation abroad than there was gold in American vaults. If every foreign holder came asking for redemption, the treasury would be emptied overnight. And so, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television. His voice was calm, his words measured, but the world was about to change forever. He announced that the United States would suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. It was supposed to be temporary. It never ended. In that moment, known today as the Nixon shock, the last link between money and metal was severed. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed only by trust. The age of fiat money had begun. At first, chaos followed. The value of the dollar plunged. Inflation soared. Oil prices skyrocketed. The world's financial system teetered. Nations wondered, without gold, why should anyone believe in the dollar? But power abhors a vacuum, and the United States moved swiftly to fill it. In 1973, amid the turmoil of the oil crisis, U.S. officials struck a series of quiet agreements with Saudi Arabia and other OPEC nations. In exchange for American protection and military support, the Saudis agreed to price all oil sales in U.S. dollars. It was a masterstroke of geopolitical genius, the birth of the petrodollar system. Because every country on Earth needed oil, and to buy oil you needed dollars. The demand for gold no longer mattered. The demand for energy replaced it, and as long as oil was traded in dollars, the world would keep needing them. Once again, the U.S. had found a way to turn necessity into dominance. Foreign nations, flush with oil revenue, recycled their petrodollars back into U.S. banks and treasury bonds. The cycle was self-sustaining. America imported oil and goods, paid in dollars, and those same dollars came back to finance American debt. The United States could now run deficits indefinitely. Its currency had become the oxygen of global trade. But this new freedom came with invisible consequences. Without the discipline of gold, money creation depended solely on policy, on human judgment, politics, and ambition. The temptation to overspend was irresistible. Through the 1970s, inflation surged. Ordinary Americans felt it in their grocery bills and paychecks. The dollar's value eroded at home even as its influence abroad remained. Then came Paul Volcker, the towering chairman of the Federal Reserve, who decided to do the unthinkable. He raised interest rates to crushing levels, forcing the economy into recession but saving the dollar from collapse. By the mid-1980s, the dollar stood strong again. Investors trusted it. Foreign governments relied on it. The greenback reigned supreme. Yet behind the scenes, the story grew stranger. With gold gone, the dollar's strength was no longer natural. It had to be managed, defended, manipulated if necessary. Central banks intervened in markets. Politicians made deals. Economists invented theories to justify the illusion. And still the system endured. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, the world became unipolar, and so did its money. The dollar was not just a currency, it was the bloodstream of globalization. Trade agreements, international loans, even wars, all were priced in the same unit of account. The greenback became both sword and shield, both lubricant and leash. America could now wage war economically. By cutting access to the dollar, it could isolate nations without firing a single shot. Sanctions became the new siege weapons. But every empire that rules through money must guard one thing above all: trust. And trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. As the 21st century dawned, cracks appeared again. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan drained trillions. The financial crisis of 2008 shook faith in the dollar-based system. Banks collapsed. Millions lost their homes. To save the economy, the Federal Reserve created trillions of new dollars out of nothing. They called it quantitative easing. For the first time in modern history, the public began to see how fragile the system truly was. Money, they realized, was not gold or paper or even debt. It was belief. And belief can vanish overnight. In the years that followed, other nations began to seek alternatives. China promoted the yuan. Russia hoarded gold. Cryptocurrencies emerged, promising freedom from central control. Each innovation, each rebellion was a quiet challenge to the dollar's throne. Still, the greenback endured, because even in doubt, the world trusts America's stability more than anyone else's chaos. But how long can that last? Today, the dollar is woven into everything: your paycheck, your phone, the price of your coffee, the balance sheets of nations. Its dominance gives the United States immense power, but also immense responsibility. Every decision made in Washington ripples across continents. A small change in U.S. interest rates can crash markets in distant lands. A single sanction can cripple an economy. The dollar is more than money now. It is the invisible architecture of modern civilization. And yet, like all empires, it carries within it the seeds of its own decline. Debt grows, trust wanes, technology evolves faster than policy. Nations begin to dream of independence from the green paper that binds them. Perhaps in some future age, people will look back at our time and see the dollar as we see the Spanish peso or the Roman denarius, relics of power once absolute, now only symbols of history. But not yet. For now, the dollar still rules, not through metal or might, but through belief, through networks and contracts, through habits and hope. It rules every transaction, every trade, every whispered deal across oceans. It lives in servers, satellites, and credit lines, a ghost of gold, a promise still trusted. And that is the secret. The U.S. dollar is not just America's currency. It is the world's story of faith. A story born from revolution, shaped by wars, lifted by trust, and protected by power. Every bill, every coin, every digital dollar carries within it centuries of invisible struggle, between governments and markets, between scarcity and ambition, between the seen and the unseen. When you hold a dollar, you are holding history itself, a story of human belief, of fear and confidence, of promises kept and broken. It began as silver and sweat, became paper and ink, then code and data. But through it all, one truth remained constant. Money is never just money. It is trust, power, and mystery, the trinity that binds empires together and tears them apart. And as long as people believe in the story, the dollar will live on, green, silent, and omnipresent. Because in the end, the true value of the dollar has never been gold or numbers. It has always been faith.
Title: The Secret Power Behind the U.S. Government. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States emerged as the most powerful nation on Earth. Cities in Europe lay in ruins, empires had fallen, and a new world order was about to begin. But beneath the triumph and patriotism, something else was forming, an invisible structure of control that would soon outlive presidents, wars, and even ideology. It began in 1947, when President Harry Truman signed the National Security Act. On paper, it was a simple reorganization of the U.S. military and intelligence community. In reality, it created a new kind of government, one built on secrecy. The CIA was born, and with it came the power to act in the shadows. For the first time in U.S. history, an agency could operate beyond public oversight, launch covert missions, and shape foreign governments, all without Congress or the public ever knowing. Fear was the fuel. The Cold War had begun, and America was terrified of the Soviet Union. Every rumor, every whisper of communism felt like a threat, and fear, as it often does, justified extraordinary measures. The the CIA quickly expanded its reach. In 1953, it helped overthrow Iran's democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. A year later, it orchestrated another coup in Guatemala. Officially, these were victories for freedom. Unofficially, they were the birthmarks of a shadow empire. Back home, another kind of power was rising. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover became a force unto itself. Hoover ruled for nearly 50 years, building secret files on politicians, activists, even presidents. He could destroy reputations with a single document. People feared crossing him, not because he was elected, but because he knew everything. Then in 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower issued a warning in his farewell speech. He spoke of a new danger, not from a foreign enemy, but from within, the military-industrial complex. He warned that a vast web of defense contractors, lobbyists, and military leaders could one day control the nation's destiny through money and fear. Few paid attention, but Eisenhower knew. He had seen it grow. By the mid-1960s, America's hidden government was thriving. The Vietnam War became a machine of profit. Corporations built weapons, politicians approved funding, and intelligence agencies justified the endless conflict. The result wasn't victory, it was dependency. War had become business. When the Watergate scandal exploded in the 1970s, Americans got a rare glimpse behind the curtain. The CIA and FBI were caught spying on citizens and manipulating political outcomes. The Church Committee investigations revealed decades of covert programs, some targeting foreign enemies, others targeting Americans. Yet, when the outrage faded, the machine kept running. The power that was born in secrecy during the Cold War had become self-sustaining. Presidents came and went, but the system endured. And while most Americans believed they were living in a transparent democracy, the truth was more complicated. The real story of America's power wasn't written in the Constitution. It was hidden in classified documents, secret budgets, and private meetings no citizen would ever attend. This was the beginning of what some now call the deep state. In Part 2, we'll travel deeper into the empire of influence that shaped wars, toppled leaders, and built a network of control that still exists today. As the Cold War raged on, the hidden empire grew stronger. The military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned about had become unstoppable. Every missile, every jet, every secret operation was worth billions. Defense wasn't just about protection, it was about profit. Behind closed doors, defense corporations like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman wielded more influence than most senators. Their lobbyists shaped budgets, their donations fueled campaigns, and their executives quietly advised military policy. The United States wasn't just fighting wars, it was sustaining them. The CIA's reach extended across the globe. In Chile, it helped engineer the fall of President Salvador Allende. In Latin America, it trained and armed regimes that promised loyalty to Washington. In Afghanistan, it funded the Mujahideen, believing they would fight communism, never imagining they would one day become America's enemies. Meanwhile, new technologies were transforming surveillance. The NSA, founded in 1952, operated in complete secrecy for decades. Even its existence was once classified. Its mission, to intercept communications across the world. With satellites, radio, and wiretaps, it quietly built the largest intelligence network in history. By the 1980s, a new kind of alliance emerged. Wall Street, defense contractors, and intelligence agencies began working together, bound by mutual interest. Money, information, and power flowed in both directions. The Iran-Contra scandal in 1986 exposed only a fraction of it: illegal arms sales, secret funding of rebel groups, and off-the-books operations. It was a reminder that the machinery of hidden power didn't stop when laws got in the way. Then came the 1990s, the dawn of the information age. Computers, the internet, and digital data opened new frontiers for control. The intelligence community saw opportunity. Instead of wiretapping phones, it could now tap into entire networks. And as the digital age rose, a new kind of player entered the stage, the tech corporation. But the real transformation would come after tragedy. The attacks of September 11, 2001 changed everything. Overnight, the government gained powers it had only dreamed of. The Patriot Act legalized mass surveillance, allowing the collection of emails, calls, and online behavior, all in the name of security. The NSA's programs grew exponentially. Every citizen became a potential suspect. The war on terror was not just a military campaign, it was an expansion of the invisible state. Trillions of dollars flowed to private contractors. Intelligence became an industry. And in that world of endless data, secrecy became the new currency. In Part 3, we'll uncover how this hidden power evolved in the 21st century. How corporations, technology, and government merged into a single system that knows more about you than you know about yourself. The 21st century didn't kill the deep state, it made it smarter. The power that once relied on spies and documents now lives in algorithms, databases, and invisible networks of influence. After 9/11, tech companies and intelligence agencies became partners. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft began signing billion-dollar contracts with the US government to store and process data. The same platforms people used to connect with friends were being used to monitor them. Every